great session. Another great session by Elvin Effendi for Nginx Ingress Controller. It's all about open source, as you know. Elvin, thank you so much for standing us and waiting. And definitely for me, as the guy who worked in Nginx, it's one of the most excited session as the previous ones. And even it's the last, I'm definitely here and I hope you are not also tired to listen. So yeah, let's keep rolling. Floor is yours. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey everyone. I wasn't hard to wait since given the speech, they were super interesting. So I didn't even realize how the time passed. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Elvin, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna go through the slides because I haven't done this before. So Sako, help me out. Do I just present or like and share my screen?
Yeah, you can share your
screen.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that.
Sure.
1 second. Okay.
Good.
I'm gonna try to pause this thing. It automatically.
So there is share screen.
I'm just gonna make it. Yeah. All right. So desktop.
Okay. Yes. We see.
What are you seeing?
Your visit card, the presentation.
Oh, cool. Okay.
You can see it. So you're good.
Perfect. Right. So my name is Elvin. I'm a senior production engineer at Shopify and co-maintainer of Ingress Nginx. In the past, I've worked in a company, a Ruby on Rails shop like Phytogram, doing online fitness and wellness studio search, and Josh Software for it was a service company. We were developing products in Ruby on Rails, and I studied at Baku State University. So today I'm gonna introduce you to Ingress Nginx controller or Kubernetes Ingress Nginx controller. But before that, let me briefly describe what Kubernetes is and what is Ingress, what is controller in the context of Kubernetes. And then we're going to continue with the components of Ingress Nginx. And finally, I'm going to touch to how one can contribute to Ingress Nginx and even potentially become a member of Kubernetes organization in GitHub. Right, so Kubernetes, we have other peers who have touched Kubernetes. What it is, it's an orchestration tool for the containerized applications. It has declarative syntax through YAML, or you can automate it through the API calls. You say you want to deploy this container of your containerized image of your application, then you mention however many virtual sphere you want, memory, or how many replicas of your applications you want to run for redundancy. Then Kubernetes takes care of scheduling them onto your nodes in your infrastructure in a smart way most of the times. Then you can configure it to take care of auto-scaling based on different metrics. Like if you say that if my application is reaching to 80% connection limit or memory limit or CPU limit or a specific metric that you emit from your application, then it sends some information to Kubernetes controller, which then increase the number of replicas of your app. It helps you with maintenance as well. I'm not gonna stay too long on Kubernetes, and this is pretty much it. You can find more information about Kubernetes elsewhere. So let's say you want to deploy your app called example.com. And somehow you deployed it using Kubernetes YAML for deployment and pod. Now, most of the times, it is the case that you want to expose your app to serve requests for other robots or users, right? Say you want to expose it behind example.com. Now, how you do that? Kubernetes provides an API through ingress resource. So it's a declarative syntax here. Again, like everything, Kubernetes provides declarative syntax, but everything can be replaced and done through the API programmatically. So in this case, what you're saying that expose my app behind example.com destination host, and for the request destined to this destination host with this path, this is a prefix-based path, so like /foo/bar also will be processed by this backend. So then you're saying that all these requests should go to this backend, and then your app is expected to listen on this port. So basically, something is going to get the request based on this configuration and reverse proxy it to your app instances, replicas. Now, what is this something that configures the data plane for example.com? So that is the controller. So you define as an operator or a developer, you define this ingress. Then this triggers a controller, which is called ingress controller. So in Kubernetes world, you have controllers controlling or watching the resources. So ingress is one type of resource. You might have a deployment resource. When you create a deployment resource, there is a deployment controller that gets triggered and then provisions the necessary infrastructure pieces based on that configuration. And in the specific case, you create this ingress resource, then the ingress controller you have deployed in your cluster, Kubernetes cluster, will get notified about this, and then it's gonna provision the necessary components in your infrastructure to ingress the traffic and reverse proxy it to your app instances. Okay. Right, so Ingress Nginx or Kubernetes Nginx Ingress Controller is one of such controllers for controlling ingress resources. A bit of statistics about Ingress Nginx project. I'm just gonna read it out loud. 6-7 releases, over 480 contributors from all around the world, 500 GitHub stars, and almost over 100 million downloads of the Docker image since 2018. 54,000 monthly visits to the documentation website. And we have a lot of users in our Kubernetes Slack channel as well. Right, so how does Ingress Nginx work? So there are two main components, control plane and data plane. So this here, the Ingress Nginx, is comprised of two components like Nginx and Go controller. The controller is written in Go. And the controller watches the Kubernetes API, Kubernetes master. As soon as there is for example, an ingress resource is created, the master is gonna push it to the controller, or controller will watch the master and will get notified about that resource. Then it's gonna regenerate the Nginx configuration based on what is declared in the ingress resource. And then next time when someone tries to, sends a request to example.com, Nginx will have the configuration to know how to proxy it to the example.com app. I'm gonna see if there's any questions so that I can address, but I'm struggling to open the chat. There you go.
I think we are good now.
Okay.
I will have a couple. Yeah.
Just keep. I'm just gonna keep my eye on that. So yeah, this is like the control plane controls and configures the data plane. Basically, control plane watches everything, not everything, but the necessary things in the controller, such as ingress, config map, service, endpoints, etc. And then based on those, it generates Nginx configuration, which is the data plane, to be able to proxy and understand the request. Okay, continuing with Ingress Nginx and how it works. As I was saying, control plane is it watches ingress, service, secret, endpoints, config map resources. So like for example, why does it watch secret, you might ask? That's because when you want to install a TLS certificate when you want to configure HTTPS for your web service, for example, let's say example.com is a web app, and you want to have it available through HTTPS. So what that means is that you have to have a TLS certificate pair like installed in your server, in your endpoint, to be able to do that. And in Kubernetes, you can do it. You can configure this again declaratively. So you create a secret object, then you put your public and private secret certificate data into that secret. Then you refer to that secret in your ingress definition. Then the controller knows about that and install that certificate on the Nginx container of Nginx file system, and then configures Nginx in a way that it serves that certificate next time the request hit request come for example.com. The way the controller do this is, so it has a ghost struct, internal ghost struct, encapsulating all the necessary data to generate Nginx. So think of it as a model of Nginx configuration, model using ghost struct. So it has a running model of the Nginx configuration, and every time one of these resources change, like ingress, service, secret, endpoints, then it generates the new configuration model. Then it diffs the two configuration, and if there is a difference, that means Nginx needs to be reconfigured. So as whenever there is a difference between those configuration, those two models, it's gonna reconfigure Nginx. So reconfiguring Nginx in Ingress Nginx has two parts. Normally, open source Nginx does not support on-the-fly dynamic reconfiguration. So you have to rewrite you have to regenerate the Nginx configuration file on disk, and then you have to send a reload signal to Nginx. So that's how reconfiguration normally happens with open source Nginx that we use. But in Ingress Nginx, we are using Lua to empower Nginx. What that means, for example, we handle the upstream change, the endpoint change dynamically. You don't have to reload Nginx. Like to give you an example why this is so important, we initially, a few years ago in my company, we attempted to install Ingress Nginx in our infrastructure, and it was practically unusable, because we usually have like over 400, 500 endpoints in a cluster, and we deploy 30, 40 times a day. That means, and obviously you do rolling deploy. That means almost continuously you have endpoints changing and generating new Nginx reloads. So you have like Nginx reloads non-stop. That has implications. It resets connections every time. You have literally practically no keep alive connections. Also, it generates memory pressure because Nginx does a zero downtime reload, like a hot reload, where it's like, let's say you are running with a 5 Nginx worker. When you send the reload signal, it's going to create 5 more Nginx worker before shutting the other ones down. So that means during the reload process, you double your Nginx workers. And if you keep reloading, you're gonna double the double. So basically, you're gonna end up with many Nginx workers, and you can get your app on killed that way. So it didn't work for us. Therefore, we went ahead and added a dynamic load balancing and endpoint configuration to Ingress Nginx. The way it works is that so the controller, instead of writing the new endpoints into the Nginx configuration file, it creates a JSON blob and posts it through an internal HTTP interface to within Nginx processes. And there we accept we have a Lua code that parse the JSON blob and stores it in a shared memory where every Nginx worker can consume it from. Then every Nginx worker works it off from the shared memory, and then they generate their internal state of the new endpoints. So this way we avoid Nginx reloads. And recently we have also made the certificate handling dynamic. So when you delete or create a new certificate in your cluster, Ingress Nginx does not reload Nginx. So with this dynamic endpoint configuration, we were able to actually use Ingress Nginx in practice in my company. What else can I say here? So in Ingress Nginx, we use Lua extensively, and it is performant because it's using LuaJIT. So when you customize, when you write a custom script on and deploy it within your edge proxy, you have to be very careful with performance because it's intercepting every single request in your cluster. Right. So this is a brief introduction to Ingress Nginx. I don't want to go too much into technical details. To tire you, but if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer afterwards. Right, so contributing to Ingress Nginx. Before I touched how we added the dynamic endpoints configuration to Ingress Nginx, that's actually how my story with Ingress Nginx started. In my company, we have this so-called hack days, where we get 2-3 days. We can work on anything. And then I picked this as my hack days project where, okay, I decided how can I make the Ingress Nginx work for us? And then the work that I mentioned before about dynamic endpoint configuration came to life, and the author of the project was receptive to that because of the benefits that it provided. And from there on, I kept contributing to the project, which eventually got accepted and became a co-maintainer and member of Kubernetes. So what do you need to be able to get there? The other peers of mine, like Ershad and Malik, they talked about open source extensively. I don't want to repeat them, so I'm going to talk about open source contribution in the context of Ingress Nginx specifically. So for Ingress Nginx contribution, you need some experience with Golang as a programming language. If you're gonna address the issues or if you're gonna add new features to the controller, you need to familiarize yourself with how Kubernetes controllers work in general. Like general overview of Kubernetes, I would say, what it provides, what API it provides. Excuse me. Then this is gonna help you to start contributing to Ingress Nginx controller part. Then we also have the data plane, which is Nginx plus Lua Nginx module and Lua. Lua Nginx module is a Nginx C module that adds Lua support to Nginx. And it uses LuaJIT for the performance reasons.
I think, Elvin, probably once you're done, I will go to more questions. I think, I don't know, like I will have like 3, 4, 5 more questions because it's really one of the topics. So
yeah, sure. Okay, let me finish then.
Yeah, sure. Let me know whenever you want.
Yeah. So Lua Nginx model, as I said, is a Nginx C model that lets us write Lua and augment Nginx functionalities using Lua. So if you want to contribute to that part of the project, then you need to at least understand how Nginx event processing work, how Nginx, like get yourself familiarized with Nginx development. What are the different phases of Nginx request processing? What are the configuration, like what are the functionalities of Nginx that really it provides? Then I would recommend to familiarize yourself with Lua a bit. Lua is a very simple language. It's super simple, but it's important to familiarize yourself with the API of Lua Nginx model, like how can you install the Lua code that you wrote to Nginx, and what are the APIs that Lua Nginx model provides to interact with Nginx internals using Lua. So this is very important. Yeah, then to get started, go ahead and install Ingress Nginx locally through some open source Kubernetes providers for local creating Kubernetes clusters locally. Like we use Kind for development, so you can just use Kind to create local Kubernetes clusters. If you can use Docker desktop. So you need a Docker to install Kubernetes. Right. So yeah, and once you install Ingress Nginx, you can start deploying your dummy app there, and seeing like you can watch the logs, etc., how it works. Once you know how it works, then next thing is you can start with small steps. There was a great slide. I think it was Malik. I forgot who made that slide where it shows that don't start with a too steep stage where you can't jump. So start small and go up gradually. So documentation is one of the best places to start. And I bet most open source projects, let alone open source projects, most of the projects usually lack documentation, and usually there's a room for improvement. So try to do that, and when you go through the documentation, you learn a ton as well. You learn a lot. And what I find useful usually is to lurk around different channels. Like you can watch the project and get notified whenever there is a new issue, whenever there is a new PR request in the project. So even if no one asks you to review the PR, just jump in and try to provide a feedback, like try to find a mistake or even just say that, oh, what you have done here is great. Like try to understand what is going on. Try to try to comment, try to inspect their code and how do they contribute, without realizing, if you do it often enough, then you will see that, oh, you already now you know how to do things in Ingress Nginx project. By the way, this is a general tip. It is not specific to Ingress Nginx. Another way of doing this is you can go through GitHub issues, but this is very boring process. And yeah, if I have to force myself to do that. So it is hard to do, but it's still there's a value in that, where you can just browse through issues. Without context, it's going to be very hard. So I haven't mentioned this here. What you can also do is provide support. Like jump into the register in a Slack and join the Slack channel of Ingress Nginx and Kubernetes organization Slack channel, and try to help users. There's a lot of requests for support. Like they run into some issues. Most of the times they are quite simple issues. So you can actually help them and support them, and while supporting them, you can learn yourself. So that is a great way of starting to contribute to Ingress Nginx. And these are my favorite issues today. Like, I can actually give a hand with these issues. If you are interested in contributing, I'm not. Like, probably not every one of you is familiar with OCSP, but it's just like everything else. You can read the specs and familiarize yourself. So this is about adding dynamic OCSP stapling support to Ingress Nginx. I have actually worked on this recently and added this support, but it's very bare bone at the moment. And there is a link that you can follow in this slide where I listed all the next tasks that needs to be done or should be done to provide a better OCSP stapling support in Ingress Nginx. There's a room for improving the test coverage. Again, if there's no documentation, what do? You read the tests to see how the program works. So I invite you to read the E2E test specifically to see what functionalities Ingress Nginx provide, and then also read the documentation and then match them to see what is missing, what feature is not covered by the E2E test. Then you can go ahead and write a E2E test for that feature. And the third one is a simple bug fix that has been around and no one fixed it, because it's not. Yeah, it's not always intercepting with your day-to-day production process, but it's a bug, and you can fix it easily if you spend some time with familiarizing yourself. This could be your first contribution as well. Okay, this is all I wanted to talk about Ingress Nginx. If I managed to spike your interest in this project, I would be happy to follow up and help you to get your hands on the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elvin. And I'm going to start grilling you because I have so much questions. And as I say, Nginx Ingress control is one of the most used in the production environment. And in case, if you guys have questions, please also, you can join me. You can also write in chat or in the Word document meeting minute. So first question that I would say, Nginx Ingress controller, why not Envoy? Why not the Nginx itself, the one, not the community version? That's so.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask as well.
Oh, okay,
that's a great question. So the company I work at, we have extensive experience with Nginx, and prior to looking at Ingress Nginx, we have had our workload. We've been running our workload in a data center, so we weren't using Kubernetes. We were using Docker for our application workload, but for the proxies, for reverse proxies, we were running Nginx just on bare metal and managing it using Chef, right? So then at some point, a few years ago, we decided we're going to move to cloud and we're going to use Kubernetes. So we started to evaluate different options, and Ingress Nginx is a good fit, was a good fit and still is a good fit for us because of our prior Nginx experience, and most importantly because we run a lot of custom Lua middleware on top of Nginx. So if like Shopify provides stores, like if you want to create an online store or even brick and mortar, you can use Shopify's infrastructure to create your shop. Then wait, what I want to say, yeah, okay. So in this e-commerce world, like you have this flash sellers where they're very popular celebrity or something tomorrow. So they wake up and they plan a sale of an item which has very limited inventory, and then they have millions of followers in Twitter or Instagram. Then that one tweet that they post about like saying, okay, there are 5 lipstick that we're gonna announce, it generates so much traffic that you can't just scale up for that. And so we have a performant, we have some rate limiters and throttlers built using Lua into Nginx. So that means we can protect the app servers at the Nginx at the entrance without letting the request already overload the app servers. So we use this quite extensively, and we also have our custom web application firewall written in Lua running on top of Nginx. So we can, this being able to customize your reverse proxy at this level is a huge leverage. You can, if you are doing an experiment with an app, with an application that there are over 500 developers working on it, and you want to extract something out of it, you can write a custom routing logic at your reverse proxy using Lua to send only fraction of requests to that, or to send the request with certain business logic. You can't do this simply using other configurations like the static configuration.
But how about, what makes it different from API gateway? And plus, if we give example as a Kong, if you have any experience, Ingress controller and API gateway, which
I think that what we are doing is a API gateway. Like Kong is almost exactly the same thing that we are doing.
Okay.
But I don't think that Kong was there when we started using Nginx and customizing Lua. I'm not sure. I wasn't at the company at that time.
I see. But is there any difference that why we call it Ingress controller and why we call it API gateway, just in general term?
I think practically speaking, they are the same thing. So Ingress controller is configuring the gateway through the Ingress interface that Kubernetes provides. So normally in classic API gateway, they provide CLI or HTTP UI or HTTP REST endpoint where you can configure your routes, or you can register a new host, etc. In Kubernetes, you do that through the Ingress spec. Kubernetes provides you the Ingress resource where you can configure those things. And then you need a controller to map it to your gateway. Mm-hmm. So it is effectively the same thing, but done in a different way.
Perfect. And you were mentioning that you automated the certificate management. So in this case, I'm assuming you're using Let's Encrypt.
No. So the way it works, yeah, go ahead, finish your question.
Yeah, just the question would be, if you use Let's Encrypt, does it mean it will renew it automatically and every 3 months and stuff in Ingress controller? You mean that automation, or what was it different?
Oh, okay, yeah, I see where the confusion comes from. So Ingress Nginx itself is not opinionated about where you get the certificate from.
Okay.
You can use Cert Manager, for example, or you can manually provision the certificate. Ingress Nginx doesn't handle that. It expects a secret object with your certificate to be created in the cluster. So what we made the dynamic was about handling the certificate. Normally, how do you install a certificate in your proxy? You write it in a file system, and then you reload Nginx. Then you use Nginx directives to point to that file, right? Then Nginx reads it. So this is not dynamic, because then you have to reload Nginx every time you change them. So what we did is, instead of writing it to a file system, we actually post the content of the secret to within to Nginx memory. So then we expose an internal endpoint in Nginx where the controller posts an SP request where the payload is the certificate. Then a Lua code takes it in the Nginx and writes it in a shared memory. And once it's in the shared memory, then every Nginx worker can consume it. And
okay.
this all are done using Lua.
Okay, so that's amazing. And the next question would be, what's going to be the difference for that you said that your contribution was getting rid of the reload? So what's does it mean it doesn't kill the current connections, or can you just briefly describe and how it was working, and after you changed what?
Yeah. So like let's start with how it was working and what was the problem, right?
Yep.
The way it was originally working is so in Kubernetes, endpoint is a specific term. It basically abstracts out the IP address given to your specific pod in Kubernetes. And whenever your pods change, so your pods change when you deploy your app, or one of the instances of your app suddenly decides that it's gonna die, terminate or exit, right? Because of a memory leak or whatever, then it's gonna go away. So all these events triggers a reload in Nginx. So all these events means that the set of endpoints has changed. And when the set of endpoints has changed, in the original implementation of Ingress Nginx, the controller generated a new configuration on the file, so that contained the new version of the endpoints, new list, right? And imagine this process happens almost every 5 seconds. So you generate a new file, you send reload signal to Nginx, 5 seconds, it happens again, and Nginx reload in a in a heavy load environment does not happen instantaneously. If you have like few requests, then that's fine. But if you're talking about thousands of requests per second, then Nginx reload is going to take time. Since it's graceful, it can't just shut down the request connections. So it's going to wait. It's going to wait certain time to drain the current request on the old workers. So to do that gracefully, and so let's say you have 10 or 5 Nginx workers, right? And then when you send the reload signal, Nginx is going to fork another 5 worker processes. So you're going to end up with 10 worker processes while the old 5 workers are draining their requests. And that process can take time, definitely more than 10 seconds. But again, this depends on your load. If you're not running a heavy load, then you don't really care. So during this time, you have 10. Now imagine your app got deployed again. So it creates a new list of endpoints. So controller is going to create, before that previous reload ended, your controller is going to create new set of new configuration, and it's going to send reload to Nginx again. So you have 10 workers, and another 5 workers will come up. So you're going to end up with 15 Nginx workers. And it can happen again before any of these workers are terminated. So more 5 workers. And eventually you're going to get your pod ohm killed. So you're going to get out of memory and boom, it's gone. So we actually run into this in production.
We run into it, yeah.
Yeah. So the dynamically handling endpoint solves this by avoiding Nginx reload. And in addition to that, then you get latency improvements, right? So by avoiding reload, you don't have to reset the connections with downstream clients. The connections can stay, and that means you leverage keep alive as long as you configure them. But if you reload, then you're gonna reset all the keep alive connections and force your clients to reconnect. And this is a side benefit.
what was the kind of technically, if you explain, what was it, how you change it, the not avoid to reload? So
so in Nginx you can so if you want to expose an endpoint in Nginx, you create a virtual server, right? A server block. Then you bind to a specific port or Unix socket or whatever. So we created a specific internal endpoint that just binds to localhost on a custom port. And then we have a Lua handler there. So instead of, when the request comes there, instead of proxying it to another upstream, we actually handle it within Nginx using Lua. So controller takes the JSON, like the endpoints, JSON encodes it. So you have this JSON blob with the list of endpoints. Then it posts it, HTTP posts it to that internal endpoint. Then Lua takes it and writes it into a shared memory. Then in every worker, we have this we have this loop that runs every second. They take the raw JSON blob from the shared memory, they decode it, and then they create an internal state for themselves about all the available endpoints. Then, so this doesn't end there. There is more. So in order to be able to consume those endpoints, you also have to bypass Nginx built-in load balancing phase. So we do that as well. We bypass Nginx built-in load balancing phase. Instead, we handle it in Lua. So whenever load balancing phase comes in the request handling, and to give you a few words about load balancing phase, this is where Nginx picks the upstream. Like request comes, multiple phases, and load balancing phase. This is where Nginx decides to what upstream it needs to reverse proxy this request, right? So we hijack that and we run Lua code there. And then once we hijacked it, once we have the control of it, we can pick any upstream we want. So then you have to implement your own load balancing. We have round robin, EWMA, among other algorithms implemented in Lua. And then, yeah, we consume the endpoints that we generated previously dynamically in that phase and pick the best endpoints according to the load balancing algorithm configured.
Nice explanation. And just last logics, because I think we are also running out of time. So for this kind of stuff, for the decision you explain just verbally, do you usually have like tech spec document that you write and you kind of brainstorm around the way to do it? And do you have any community calls for Ingress running, like, I don't know, bi-weekly or something? Because for Mesher, for example, it's every Friday running like during PST, like 8 a.m., something like that. Is there any community call for Ingress currently?
There are only 3 core contributors at the moment.
Okay.
So if it is a big change like the dynamic endpoint reconfiguration, I usually get it peer reviewed internally with in my company, and then externally with the author of Ingress Nginx. And several months ago, we introduced another process to have some rigid process in this for this. It's called this is basically a copy of Kubernetes enhancement proposal. It's called KEP, Kubernetes enhancement proposal. So if you want to make a big change such as this in Ingress Nginx, you have to write a KEP.
Okay.
And in your and KEP is literally what you said, where you describe all these pros and cons and explore alternatives and get it reviewed, and then only then start implementing that. Yeah. So like if you have an idea like this, you are welcome to write a Kubernetes enhancement proposal. And we actually have a few enhancement proposals in the project. So that is another opportunity if you want to contribute some huge amount of work to the project.
Okay. I think that should be it. I think if I continue, it will take another hour. I know that is a topic I really would love to go through more. But I think we're gonna stop here, Elvin. Again, thank you so much for your time. And Elvin is here in Gulp Slack channel. I think I love that he came also with his initiative. So if you're interested, like me, curious about Ingress, which is the key part, if you are in DevOps field, especially if you are running in large scale production application, microservice, all basically like front end, back end, container, everything. It's really, Nginx is one of the key piece you have to learn. And the best way to learn is by doing stuff like Elvin to get your hands dirty. And yeah, Elvin, I think just briefly, maybe you can tell us, what do you think for if we are willing to contribute, should ask you in community channel or the way you would like, how you would like to, in case you can.
Like reach out to me in Gulp Slack, and
Okay.
then we'll take it from there.
Okay, perfect. And the recording will be go out, and if you are watching after and during the call, and you can always reach Elvin. And I think that's an easy way to start, and just pick some issue, start first thinking about, and then reach Elvin and get some guidance. And thank you so much. And we are a bit sorry for the timing. It was from the organization time for the planning, and hopefully it's still fine that people are still on the call. And thank you so much. And hopefully we'll meet tomorrow again, 7 p.m. to 7 to 10 in Baku time. For SF time, it's for me, it's from 8 to 11 a.m. For you, Elvin, in Canada, what's the timing?
It's 2:50 now.
Yeah, 2:15. So
2:50.
2 to 5 or?
No, 10 minutes to 3.
Yeah,
like 2:50.
Like time start and end are gonna be from for you. For just from when we started, what time was it for you?
I don't remember, sorry.
Okay. Anyway, you can
but
check.
I can, yeah. One thing I wanted to mention before we before you finish this is like, if you're like, contribution aside, if you are evaluating reverse proxy ingress controller for your infrastructure, I would be happy to discuss pros and cons and share my experience with Ingress Nginx at scale. We run it with over millions of requests per minute and with a lot of endpoints, and yeah, have a lot. And last but not least, your video background is hilarious, Saka.
Yeah,
I love it.
Thanks so much. And I just 5 minutes before the meeting, I just was thinking what I should put, and then I thought, oh, nice. So, and yeah, tomorrow we have like.
I think, sorry for the interruption. I think you should have shared that with us as well, so that we could have.
Yeah, I'm gonna put in the community channel, guys, and if you like.
Yeah. It looks dope.
And yeah, definitely today's 3 out of 5 talks was open source and their core maintainers. I put in chat, I just want to rephrase, Elvin Effendi, Malik Taguer, and Lee Kalkute. These people, to get mentorship from these people for free, it's, I mean, as for engineers, it's amazing. So definitely engage you to use as much as join to any of the project you are interested and contribute. And tomorrow we'll have just briefly 5 more sessions. Eminos will start with open source operating system development. He has some brain draining presentation. I have seen, like, going deep dive that's for hardware level, and feel free to join. He is developing the operating system from scratch and including the compiler, etc. And then they will have Mehmet for the security, the amazing talk. He is one of the top security guys in web security. And then we're gonna have Imran Yusupov. He has, for a long time, he's running microservices in production, and he's using Student Army to develop it. So you can join. And then I'll have DevOps for me. And then last but not least, Jumshud and Nurlan gonna talk about how they took open source ERP system, and they're currently making money. They're making customer, and they really built SaaS on top of it, which is really use case is zero or no investment, just using your skills and using open source, you can make money, and it's real. And these guys gonna talk about, and they're in the closing ceremonies, they're gonna give some nice gifts for participants, but you have to be active. And yeah, then we will close the ceremony and we'll call it our weekend. Hopefully you enjoyed and you're enjoying, and you're always welcome for any feedbacks. Thanks again, Elvin and Malik, all the speakers and all the joiners. I think we are good for today. And
Take care, everyone.
Elshad, Emin, all the organizing team.
Hey guys, have a great night ahead and mornings for some.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have night, so I'm gonna say good night.
Yeah, so